I've set out to uncover the universe. I failed spectacularly. Every approach taken over the course of 4 years seemed lacking. The words were deficient, insincere. There was no true clarity of vision. Though the following poems are youthful attempts, however, they are not feeble attempts. I really could not afford to half-ass things, even if I had wanted to. These poems, I now understand them as what they will always be, the product of evil, an evil man, or rather a malignant thing within the man, in crucial need of being exorcised, wrenched from me like something so very important and also deceiving. And importance as much the brute of this my own leather psyche as any villain. It is most of all achingly prolonged. A harassment, fixed like a fucking parasite, setting in its fangs with stubborn, harmful persistence until I acquiesce and become, after all, at last, the humiliatingly out-of-control human being I had for so long feared, displaced. But this was something that needed to be done. It is still in need of being done. Very much so. That being said, I once thought them all, the whole batch of my efforts, to be comprised of some of the feeblest poems I had ever seen. Futility to an even lower birth. A failure. A bathos more profound. Improperly derived when compared to what was necessary to dig out from the languor of the whole. This variable imagination I have, apparently. I wish to celebrate this peculiar aspect of my work. I do not necessarily view it as a negative thing. I wish to prize the flaws for what they are, igniters of the flame that keeps on going out. Aberrances dwell and fester in the corners of even my best work. I cannot be rid of them. As such, there must be a reason for these flaws to exist. It does not seem this way. Their unceasing plague upon the schemes of my world turns the schemes into an imitation rather than the real thing. I'm all too aware of the presence of this imitation, and it eats me alive as I try to beat it to death. Perhaps that is why it is needed. The thought of something insufficient is what plagues the best of us with a dogged need to triumph over it. I wish to document this idea, as well the creative process of this volume, by using the poems themselves. There are, I admit, some pieces I could have cut out, but I had to keep the lesser poems. I, albeit ostensibly, solve the problems of the lesser ones, or at least recognize the defects in them through means of the postulations and analyses of better and stronger poems. More importantly, the lesser poems serve to highlight the struggle to attain and distill ideas. This volume is a record of how I succeed, much as how I am defeated. Some poems seem almost to learn from the failure of others and improve upon what the others were trying to get across. I want to show the reader that the creative process is a learning experience. Foolishly, I worked and worked, knowing that it could possibly be endless each time, with each piece more and more endless. The paranoia of something unfinished and the degradation of art is a central theme in my work. The idea of the artist chugging forward foolishly in an attempt to approach the zenith, the sublime, a poem of the earth rather than a poem of the air, in the words of Harold Bloom. Stéphane Mallarmé understood that the zenith was unreachable and embraced nothingness in order to find the true, unassuming nature of beauty, plain in the fact that there is no zenith, that it is all a zenith and thus all nothingness. Here's my trouble. I must look at perfection as being attained through a series of steps, and those steps have led me not to perfection, but to mere difference. Nature, I believe, is itself something that, from start to finish, has achieved what it had wished to achieve. It needs no build. It is already built. In these works, I set out on an undertaking that is the antithesis of such natural order. The poems will start as soldiers, let us say. Rugged and pale, battle-hungry, these men will buckle beneath the heft of an idea not fully known to them. They will voyage across a chapped land, a deserted space, searching for conflict. They will give up the ghost after a long time wandering a deserted length of nowhere, close to being starved, and when in the final throes of desperation will come across an oasis, scattered with palms and brush. Once found, the poems go there to drink from the blue pool, bathe in it, clean themselves, and are restored. However, in processing their sudden good fortune, the soldiers realize they are in the presence of an idea. The soldiers, these odd figuratives, feel it lingering somewhere in the dank waters. It is a guild creature that has evaded being caught since the beginning of time, and is thus ancient as time. Soon enough, one of the men catches sight of the idea as it navigates freely throughout a secluded part of the pool, thinking itself alone. This idea is something that must not be observed until it is complete. Becoming aware of the observation, the idea panics and suddenly becomes still within the depths. Then it begins to morph and wrinkle before their eyes. It begins to grow and grow into an ugly mass. Finally, it collapses upon itself in an eddy's form that slowly expands from the center of the pool. The words dive into the whirl of the vortex, wishing to retrieve it. At this point, what is left of the idea has already gone deep into the vortex. It is crushed under the pressure of it and begins to hemorrhage. It bleeds out from the source and then fades, leaving pieces of itself to ascend, floating back to words. The words, these lines, make a concentrated effort to obtain the pieces. The lines, these words, these soldiers, whatever you want to call them, realize they cannot ascend back to the surface of the vortex and swim further down into the developing eddy. The lines travel through the tumult of the eddy in the waters. The lines eventually reach the core of the eddy and mistake it for the idea which had originally captivated them. But the ideas become nothing. They struggle to extract meaning from the nothingness. There is a stupidity in this. There is insanity in this. Each word tries to build upon the last and ends up degrading the last, hypnotized by an illusion of forward motion. They're almost fully consumed in an effort to chase down a message that no longer could have gone anywhere. They have disintegrated markedly. The words do not fully realize their disintegration. In spite of this, one knows that these feeble lines at least made an attempt to gather the pieces up so as to invent their own myth out of it. The words attempt to pluck genius from out the black void of that cruel eddy. This attempt is what matters, and what inevitably sustains these lines to the end. With this volume, I've rose out the depths and produced something that is not sublime, but the highest possible level that my numerous derivations could reach. I do not know what level I shall ultimately reach. Such is my anxiety. I press on with a vigor that ultimately becomes an obsession, then madness, towards the goal of perfection. If an artist merely struggles enough as to not be fully consumed by the core of the eddy, he has made an achievement in my eyes. To me, blank feel of that core, that nothingness, is an embodiment of the purest muse. In order to appease it, I had to give up my stubborn methods of art and start over. I was born with a flawed system. I taught myself another system that was also flawed. I went on fixing things before realizing that no modifications were needed. Then I came to the conclusion I was wrong to think that none were needed. It was just that nothing could be changed without degrading also the host of such whims. I was born flawed. Suppose that when you think about this, the concept of original sin seems apt. Thus, I shall start with nothingness. Nothingness teaches us to start from the beginning, yet again and again, by stripping away all possible distracting or offending platitudes. I must rid myself of such platitudes. Comfortable ways to write, the comfort of thinking my work is truth. I've submerged myself into the core of that fucking eddy, and have found there is no truth. My words become void of meaning. The more I try to hang on to my dumb assertions, the more the void envelops. I'm human. And as a result, I must yield to some sort of foundation, occupying the center of nothingness. I am blinded no more by external or, in some cases, internal influences. I must create my own truth. Must do so. My own mythology of invention. The concept of degradation is central to modern poetic theory. Again, I'll use an example from the beginning of Harold Bloom's The Poems of Our Climate. American poetry, since Emerson, has followed a triple rhythm. It must be broken, must not bear having been broken, it must seem to have been mended. The it that Mr. Bloom is talking about is, in my eyes, the idea that the poem is trying to get across. The way it breaks is either through the degradation of style or of that idea. Indeed, these poems of mine do not bear having been broken. They fracture a bit at first due to some force unknown to them and continue to break. But an external force is no longer what breaks them. In fact, they break themselves. The aforementioned paranoia of decline is exactly what causes the decline. It becomes clear that what occupies my head has somehow lessened in circumference. All I seem to talk about is the decline. However, it is not a sharp decline. Every so often, the words seem to break free of the nothingness and stumble upon a wonderful new idea, or speak from the page with a semblance of grace. Bits and bits of beauty and pain, made all the more beautiful for their struggle to be freed from the blackness of the muse. I have not even now reconciled with the muse. I have not shaken hands with it. No. I fought to free myself from it. This fight is exactly what has given the lines poignancy and verve. It is also what causes me to wander from the truth. In the struggle to ascertain verbal power, I can lose the meaning to a pack of dogs. In a struggle to ascertain the meaning, the verbs weaken. The struggle cannot be the subject, and yet the subject cannot be gotten to without a struggle. After all, we have not evolved enough. Our language has not evolved enough to encompass everything. I must work with what I have. What I have is the pathos of the struggle to make words meaningful. You can see it bleeding out of the pages. And you can see it rescind. You can see it rescind into a frightening nullity. And yet the nullity is not akin to a clinical rhapsode like Samuel Beckett. It is the nullity of a poet who has not yet found his voice, who recognizes his limitations and tries to transcend them. It's making every effort possible to do so. It is much more personal. However, once I break free from the muse, I know I will no longer write. Shall suffer mutely, and never again put pen to the paper. The very thing that inspired me nonetheless would have caused my demise, simply due to my own human weakness, when up against a power beyond formidable. The great artists learn to dive in and out of the core of the muse effortlessly, but I feel as though no man can dwell there forever. This volume will be a documentation of the journey for a voice. It vacillates between something beautiful and something ugly. Some poems are complex and economical, some are simple, some take the complexity to an extreme and end up deeper into the vortex. I take 2 steps down the stairs, then 3 steps up, then 4 down, then 5 up, then 2 down, then 3 up, blah, 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 and so on in a disorganized manner that does not favor either development or devolution. It goes between one and the other before relenting to one, only in the end to finally become the other. Into which other shall my work change? I do not know. And it makes me anxious. These poems of mine also appear to be mended. Ultimately, they are still bruised by that journey towards perfection. A bruise that whatever force has inflicted upon me. I shall go insane before I go sane. And then the saneness is not quite so. I recognize this in my work as Wallace Stevens did in his. It is the work of trying to explain why. Exactly. Words cannot yet explain it all. It is the bruised consciousness that we all have, precipitated by that unknown force, that gave us doubt in ourselves, enough to become skeptics of what we hold dear. The muse, I believe, is that skeptic. There's also many other things that I shall not bother to mention. We must destroy our platitudes so that we create new ones. However, I suffer from a particular sort of shell shock, that having experienced the negation of my beliefs so forcefully, even if it was for the sake of creating something fresh, that it did not destroy me is something of a miracle. I did not let it destroy me because I feared enough of a world without some sort of sense to make of it, that I contrived my own lopsided myth to replace the idea I had lost. Once we recognize that the muse cannot live without us, all that it represents would, I think, become nonsensical if ignored and permitted to swirl down the chute. I was saving the muse from such demise. By doing so, I lost something valuable. This is the philosophical pseudo-philosophical stance I have surrendered to. A celebration of the flaws in order to make them into something sublime on my own terms, however bruised, however torn all of this may be. Difference, dissent, is to me a deviation from original perfection. We are each the members of a perfected and unified whole. Unfinished pieces that in the way of their fragmentation are simultaneously flawed, and yet contain a figment of the sublime. The muse tries to connect the pieces and miscalculates where some should go or not go, and the final picture is a picture of insanity or myth. Whether this volume is myth or insanity, I don't know. Nor do I give a damn.